Trust the Profits is proud to be sponsored by Game of Silks. Go to silks.io to get in the game. Real ownership, real races, real rewards.
Heyo! Welcome aboard, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Trust the Profits here with a good old friend, Matthew DeSantis, joining us today because we have three big Kentucky Derby prep events going on this weekend. One that is especially close to Matthew, so we'll take a look at that one first. A little deeper dive into that one with the NYRA expert here. First off, Matthew, how have you been? You've been on our channel a few times as a guest, but if you're new to the channel, Matthew was a staple on here for the past couple of years, and it's good to see you again. Good to have you back on. So, how have you been, and what's been going on over there at NYRA?
Yeah, no, I've been doing well. Thank you for asking. Thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and have a chance to chat with you both while we're doing this, as well as just catching up a little bit before and after the broadcast. So, yeah, I'm doing great. I mean, obviously, a lot of exciting racing going on up here at NYRA with the Gotham this weekend as the Kentucky Derby prep trail heats up. And doing a lot of cool things with NYRA Bets, and that's one of the fun things about NYRA Bets is that we cover all the tracks, not just NYRA. So that's as you see the races going down at Gulfstream, at Fairgrounds, at Oak Lawn, out at Santa Anita, etc. I'm trying to keep up with all of that stuff, have content, promotions about all of those things. So yeah, it's been great. I mean, staying super busy. And the weather up here is actually kind of taken a turn for the better the last couple of days. So it's been unseasonably warm up here in New York. So we're fingers crossed we have some decent weather for this weekend. Looks like maybe we have a little bit of showers, but it shouldn't be too cold. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see. But yeah, things are good, man. And I really love to see all the stuff you guys are continuing to churn out between you and Colin and the formula and Jessica, and you guys are crushing Turfway Park. That Luan Machado pick 5 is treating you well at Turfway.
Yeah, man, it's good to have you. And like I mentioned, Matt being up in New York full time now, the focus has been at Aqueduct. And let's take a look at that as we have a pretty competitive field, I think. Matt, you tell me if I'm wrong here, but let's go through it. Let's just jump right in here. The Gotham Stakes is a 1 mile race up at Aqueduct. Why don't we run through these one horse at a time? And Matt, maybe you can give your opinion quickly on each one, whether you think there's value in the morning line odds or not.
It's
Just a Touch by Brad Cox here. What are your thoughts on Just a Touch?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. The Gotham's a one-turn mile, which I think is an important distinction to make because as we get deeper into the prep season, a lot of people assume that these are all two-turn races, and this is actually a one-turn mile race, and the last kind of one-turn prep race that we have. So horses that may struggle getting two turns may actually do pretty well in this particular spot. Just a Touch is a horse that broke its maiden very impressively down to the fairgrounds for Brad Cox, recorded a huge speed figure, and certainly does look to be very, very competitive. One of the things that I would just caution people toward is in recent weeks, we have seen multiple horses that have just graduated from the maiden ranks run against prep competition and kind of fizzle. So you can think of a horse like Dymatic last week at Oaklawn in the Rebel. 2 weeks ago, a horse like Hall of Fame in the Risen Star. Even before that, Change of Command by Shug McGahee down at the Sam F. Davis. These were all very young horses who people were really high on, and then they get into a big spot. They don't run quite as well as you think. So we have 4 horses exiting maiden victories who are in the probable field for Saturday. So just something to keep in mind when we talk about these. But Just a Touch, super talented, no doubt about it. And Cox, has a huge barn with tons of Derby contenders, and this one looks to potentially get a shot to get in the starting gate.
You mentioned 4 of the maiden winners. Christophe Clement has 2 of them. The first one being Deterministic. Give us your thoughts on this horse. By the way, the official drawing and morning line odds are not out yet. It is early in the week here. We're trying to cover this as early as possible, so we do not have that. But when we finish up going through these, we'll kind of take a guess at who we think will be the morning line odds favorite and then who Matthew likes. So Deterministic, where are you at on Deterministic?
Well, I love this horse. This horse broke its maiden up at Saratoga this summer and has been off ever since. This is a highly, highly, highly talented horse, though. And I think has a really big future, has been working out lights out for Clement down in South Florida. And, the question with him is whether he fires off the bench. I think, which is a legitimate question to have, certainly, as having not run since August or July. But he seems like a horse that if he's not going to be in the starting gate of the Kentucky Derby, he feels like a horse that could very well be in the starting gate for the Belmont, or could be a factor later in the summer, in the Jim Dandy and the Travers among this 3-year-old crop. He's that talented. And so he's a one to really keep an eye on. He's a big X factor because of him coming off that layoff. And Capital Idea, really good horse. Obviously drew away and won easily in his second career race, which was the victory against maiden competition. It should be noted the horse that finished a distant second came back to run recently and finished third, another maiden special weight at Aqueduct. So the strength of that maiden special weight race is kind of maybe yet to be determined, but certainly a horse that should like all the distance you want to give them, and seems to be a very legitimate horse for Clement, who we should say has never had a horse in the starting gate of the Kentucky Derby. So, this would be a first for him to get a horse into the starting gate.
Well, one man who's definitely had some horses in the starting gate, Mr. Pletcher. Todd Pletcher has Eliminate here, sitting in the third down the list here. Eliminate, Todd Pletcher, another one of the maiden winners. And yeah, I think it's interesting that you point out, Matthew, that first off, the maiden, and especially with the layoff, you really don't know what you're going to get. I mean, some of these horses have run in this prep season at this point. Some of them have run 3 or 4 times. Others have run once. And it's just, it's kind of a roll of the dice with these horses. You mentioned a big, long layoff. I mean, Timberlake just came back off a long layoff and looked great. So that you roll the dice either way with these, but I think these are the horses we obviously know the least about. But where'd you come out on Eliminate?
I'm probably a little cooler on Eliminate than maybe the other. I think the way that I have them listed here is probably the rank order for how I feel about them a little bit, with Just a Touch and Deterministic being a touch above. But Eliminate, listen, broke his maiden at Aqueduct. It looked good, obviously. Here's the thing about Pletcher, though. Todd Pletcher over the last 5 years is 2 for 34 when running 3-year-olds back in graded stakes races after breaking their maiden. So, he doesn't have a lot of success moving horses directly from the maiden special weight ranks into a graded stakes. Only 2
Matthew,
for 34.
I got to interrupt. You are the king of having these bizarro world stats, long shots. Especially, it seems like with Todd Pletcher, man. I remember you pulled one.
Oh yeah,
last year that was the shocker of a lifetime. But that's a pretty shocking figure too. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that it's amazing when you do a deep dive into the metrics of however deep of a dive you want to do into the horse racing analytics. You can find some real anomalies, and it's crazy when you look at some things like that. And it is. You can do what you want with it.
Yeah, and it's something where, I think one of the reasons why I do it with Pletcher is because a lot of trainers, you can dive into very specific angles and you discover that they might only have like 4 or 5 horses that fit that qualification. And so you go, well, I don't want to extrapolate based upon how 4 or 5 horses did. But Pletcher, to your point, has so many Derby horses every year that when you look into his stats and you dive into him, he has 30 or 40 cases, and you can go, okay, there's a trend that's emerging here. And I feel a little bit more confident either playing with or playing against a particular trend because he's done it so many times over that period of time. It's not like looking up, Clement on the Derby trail. He usually doesn't have a horse. So those statistics I don't pay much attention to, but Todd's got plenty of them.
Yeah, Pletcher's one of a handful that will have plenty of history to look at. All right, moving along. Like you said, this is getting a little bit lower in confidence. You're way more familiar with this New York circuit than I am, so I've seen about half these horses run and not the other half. But Bergen by Brad Cox, winner of the Wingfield.
Yeah, Bergen's a really good horse, and I actually like Bergen quite a bit. I listed the 4 maidens together, but I would actually say Bergen's, one of the top 1, 2, or 3 contenders in this race. He's a really serious horse. It was interesting that Cox had him stretch out. He finished third. He ran perfectly fine, and then was also on a little bit of a layoff, and then came back and sprinted, and then went to the Wingfield, which is a 6 furlong sprint, and now he's stretching him back out to a mile. And maybe Cox just thinks he's a one-turn horse, and that this is the best way to get him into the starting gate of the Derby is to potentially win this, which if you win this 50-pointer, you're in. basically. So, maybe that's his thought. It's interesting. He's a very talented horse, though. He's very, very good. He won that Wingfield impressively. And I think he has the pedigree to go longer than a mile. So it's interesting that Cox is kind of moving him back onto the Derby trail there. I should say 2 of the last 14 winners of the Gotham have come out of the Wingfield. So going back to what I said earlier, it being a 1-turn mile, it brings in sprinters in a way that you might not normally have in a Derby prep race.
And Matt, I have a quick question for you. Now that you're up in the New York circuit full time, why is it that the Gotham is a mile still? I mean, is it? I guess it's a historical thing, and I know this comes up all the time. And it's controversial, but it's for a reason. I mean, if you're truly trying to get a Derby horse at this point, you'd like to see him stretching a little bit. But I mean, then you go back to there's a lot of history on the race. So is that what it is? The history stopping it, or is there a better reason?
No, there's not really a better reason. It's interesting though, because one of the more productive prep races that we have in New York is the Remsen. And, obviously we saw Sierra Leone, who finished second in the Remsen, come back to win the Risen Star. Dornick, who won the Remsen, we're going to talk about here in a second, running at the Fountain of Youth. The Remsen, I bring the Remsen up because that's a 1.1 miles. And that's when they're 2-year-olds. And it's,
it's wild.
4 earlier. So, it's interesting. It's not like New York is kind of babying these horses along.
Yeah,
like we throw them into the deep end with Remsen. But then, we have this 1-turn mile race, which is, it's a little bit of an anomaly. And I think it can absolutely give way to kind of flukier results when you think about the way it shakes out on the Derby trail, which is why the Gotham is usually not a great Derby prep indicator. But it might explain why the Memorial has traditionally not been that great either.
Yeah, I picture some dude up in a booth somewhere at Aqueduct with a cat laying on his lap, petting the cat like whatever his name was, Gargamel from Smurfs, Dr. Evil, either one. Petting the hairless cat. The Gotham is going to stay a mile forever. That type of thing. So I don't know. El Grande O is a familiar name from Linda Rice. Second to Jerome. Where do you see El Grande O here?
It's interesting. El Grande is a horse that will like this setup. So I don't think he can get 2 turns, as was evidenced in the Jerome. He ran great, but Brad Cox's horse, drumroll please, kind of went right by. It didn't even run a huge race and went kind of right by him and was able to win that pretty easily. But El Grande fights really hard. He's a legitimate horse. He's a good horse. He should love the 1-turn mile setup. He's a speed horse, though. He's going to be up on the front end, but he's shown that he can handle a mile at this track going at pretty good fractions. So it would not shock me if El Grande O were to upset this field in some way. You talk about a horse that's run a lot. This is a horse that's run a ton, and so has run against stakes competition really since the middle of his 2-year-old year. So this is a horse that's used to running in big spots for Linda and has always turned in honest efforts every single time out. That really doesn't run bad races. And so he's a horse that, if you want to talk about value, maybe if we skip ahead a little bit, that's a horse that could provide some value for you if you're looking to get past some of the more flashy names and coming out of the maiden ranks for a horse like Bergen.
Yeah, that's the horse I was definitely most familiar with, just based on exactly what you just said. Maximus Meridius, trained by the natural Butch Reed, which I'm sure, I know you're a wrestling nerd, so you definitely know who the natural Butch Reed is, which obviously this is not natural Butch Reed, but it's Butch Reed nonetheless.
Yeah, and Butch upset the apple cart in our last prep race with Uncle Heavy. He came up from Parks and won that last one. So, and he's going to be coming back in the Wood Memorial. And so Maximus Meridius, listen, he's a decent enough horse. He won an allowance race down in Parks last time out. It is always kind of hard to get a sense of how the Parks horses ship up. I think Butch is one of the few trainers who I really have a lot of confidence in when he ships his horses up from Parks, that they're going to run in an effective way. So, I think Maximus Meridius is going to be a big price on the board. It might be a little up against this level of competition, but, I think Butch kind of felt the same way about Uncle Heavy, like give the horse a shot, see what happens. And, crazier things certainly have happened on the Derby trail before, but he's one who I think is going to be a little bit up against it, like I said, to get the job done here.
Yeah, it seems to me that, and I'm sure you can agree on some level, the Aqueduct preps usually generate tote boards exploding all over the front stretch, because I mean it's the most likely, because of like we talked about with the distance up and down a little bit throughout the season, and just you got Uncle Heavy. I can't remember what he went off at, but that was not one of the favorites.
Yeah, that was like 23-1, I want to
Yeah,
say.
I mean that's a big price, and you're going to get those a lot in New York.
Yeah.
And then before we go too deep into that, but Deposition is the last one on the list here. St. Louis.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Down.
finished fourth to Uncle Heavy in that Withers. Uriah St. Louis, another trainer who's coming up from Parks with a lot of horses. I think Deposition kind of wasn't also ran in that Withers. I think this is probably a deeper field. And so this will be, I think, really tough if he ends up being entered in this spot. So, definitely not a horse that I'm going to be using on my tickets.
So of this group, first of all, before we talk, who do we like in this race? Are any of these horses Derby horses? Legit?
I think you could say, I think in terms of a legit Derby horse, I think you could say a horse like Bergen could be. And I think it just depends on how much a horse like Just a Touch or Deterministic matures. And
we just don't know because of
we don't know.
Yeah,
we don't know. And I think those are the two to really keep an eye on: Just a Touch and Deterministic. I mean, if Deterministic comes out and runs the way he's been training, he could really surprise and jump up and suddenly give Clement a horse that maybe he wants to run in the wood. But and Just a Touch, same sort of thing with Brad Cox. I mean, the Wood Memorial is not the strongest prep as well. So again, when you're talking about, are these Derby horses? Well, do you mean, are they going to be in the starting gate of the Derby, or do you think they're going to be Derby contenders?
Yeah, I guess that's a starting point.
Yeah.
Who of this group do you see in making the gate at least? Because I understand.
I think the horse that I'm probably most confident about making the gate is Bergen, because he's the most kind of mature. He's the one that has the most back class. He's the one that has, the most wins racked up already. Now, that said, he doesn't have any Kentucky Derby points, so he's going to need to start here. But I think he's a horse that you have to take pretty seriously in this spot, and could gain some more points in the Wood Memorial, whether he wins or finishes second or third, and get in the starting gate.
Yeah, and the way the Baffert, California situation works out, you just need to get a couple top threes in these type of races, and that's enough. You don't have to win out. To close out the Gotham, let's take Matt. Why don't you give us a little insight? First of all, who do you think is going to be the morning line favorite? Is there somebody who stands out that is definitely going to be the morning line favorite to you? Without,
it's interesting. I think, the morning line favorite is always a tricky thing. I think David Aragona, who does it for us, is the best in the business. And I think he's one of the few people who understands the difference between a morning line and your opinion, that the morning line is a reflection of how you believe the public is going to bet, not necessarily who you think is the favorite in the race.
He is one of the best too.
I think a horse like Just a Touch could end up becoming your morning line favorite, just because the connections for Brad Cox, that really flashy debut at Fairgrounds. I think, people naturally are going to gravitate towards that. But I think he and Bergen, I would say the two Cox horses are your most likely morning line favorites.
All right. Is that your betting choice? Are going to go fall in line with that too? Or do we have, I know you mentioned a couple price plays, maybe El Grande.
Yeah, I think El Grande is a horse that I'd be interested in using, depending on who officially draws in and how the pace scenario looks. El Grande is a horse I'd absolutely consider using. Even if I don't use the horse as a win bet, I would use this horse underneath in all of my exotics. And then, again, depending on how the board looks leading up to the race, a horse like Deterministic might be worth taking a shot on. That's a horse to really keep an eye on in the paddock, in the post parade, on the track. How does this horse look? Does the horse look like he's coming back from a 6-month layoff, or does he look fresh? Does he look like he's puffed up and matured? Those are important things to keep an eye on.
Yeah, because with that long of a layoff, man, it's a different animal coming back at this point. That's what a lot of the concern was with Timberlake, and he lived up to it again, but they don't always. I mean, Timberlake was a successful version of what sometimes doesn't always work out with the long layoffs. With absolutely. That said, go ahead, Matt.
No. Just agreeing with you. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. We're going to touch on the other two. We're not going to deep dive them quite as much. The Fountain of Youth and the San Felipe. Let's jump at the Fountain of Youth, where I think this has a couple of the bigger names, definitely two of the bigger names amongst our circle of friends and chat and Twitter folks here. Dornoch, the 5, and Locked, who are definitely the 2 favorites coming into this one. The 5 horse and the 8 horse here, as you see them. Do you want to run through the whole field, or do you want to just give some opinions here? Because I really think, I think Dornoch is much more impressive than Locked at this point. But
yeah, I mean, so I
think there's a couple outsiders that have a shot here too.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's something to keep in mind, which is a horse like Speakeasy for Todd Pletcher is a cross-entered, which is why we'll have a little asterisk there next to that name. And same thing with Merit. So if Speakeasy decides not to draw into this race, then that changes the pace complexion a little bit. But certainly you're going to have a horse like Victory Avenue on the front end, as well as Dornoch on the front end. Now we know that, Gulfstream Park tends to carry front end speed very well. So going gate to wire, like we saw with the Pegasus, with a horse like National Treasure, sustaining strong fractions and still being able to hold off Senior Buscador, so the track on big days can be pretty souped up and pretty speed favoring. So certainly a horse like Dornoch gets elevated, I think, a little bit in that regard. If Speakeasy does draw in, though, it creates a little bit more of a complicated pace scenario for everybody, because Speakeasy, Victory Avenue, Dornoch, they all want to get out there on the front end. They all have superior and elite early speed, and suddenly the race might set up a little bit better for Locked, coming from off the pace if the 3 of them kind of wear each other out. So I do think whether Speakeasy draws in is a big deal. The statistic I gave you earlier about Todd Pletcher applies to Speakeasy as well. This is a horse moving directly from a maiden victory into a really tough spot now for the Fountain of Youth. Victory Avenue, who finished second to Speakeasy and is still a maiden, is also in this race, but the horse earned a 97 Beyer speed figure for a second place effort. So, but they're both trying 2 turns for the first time. So there's some questions there. I do think Dornoch's really, really good. I think he's going to go off much below 2-1. And so as a result, if you like Locked and the way the pace scenario works out, you could get a decent price on him.
So outside of the pace scenario change with Speakeasy in or out of the race, do you think Speakeasy is a horse that can win if he's up on the pace?
I kind of have a hard time getting there with him just because he's going from 7 furlongs to a mile and a 16th. So we're going from 1 turn to 2 turns. Like I said, we've also seen this history of these, very precocious horses that just broke their maidens not really come through the next race. And so I think that's something just to keep in mind. I wouldn't be surprised if the horse ran well. Reminds me a little bit of Mage. If you remember, Mage finished second in this Fountain of Youth last year to Forte. So, you could see a horse like Speakeasy or Victory Avenue finishing second to a more established horse like Dornoch or Locked. That would totally make sense to me. But this is
on the way Mage got closed on by Forte. It could work out that exact same way, actually.
Yeah.
So outside of those 3, those are I know Speakeasy's kind of the wise guy pick. I feel like I've seen a lot more talk on him as the wise guy. Hopefully takes a bunch of money if you're going against him. But anybody else in the field that you give a shot? Victory Avenue, you mentioned. You think anybody else? Victory Avenue has a shot to win, or anybody else?
Yeah, I think Victory Avenue has a shot. Absolutely, I do see this as a pretty top-heavy race with the top 4 being pretty heads and shoulders above everybody else. That I think other horses in this race have questions about whether they want to do 2 turns, questions about Lasix. I mean, there's just a lot of questions for some of those horses. So as a result, I do think it's a top heavy race. Your winner is going to come out of the top 4. That said, the fact that a horse like Dornoch could take a lot of money, especially considering how good Sierra Leone looked and he beat Sierra Leone. It allows other people's prices to float up. So it could still be a good betting race, even if it is a little bit of a top-heavy race.
Yeah, I think Dornoch, I mean, that race you just mentioned was Sierra Leone. The way Sierra Leone came back and looked dominant in his own right, I mean, that's going to say one of 2 things. Either Dornoch's that good or, Sierra Leone's improved a lot. Either way you want to look at it. But either way, deserving favorite. I agree. It's completely top-heavy. I think there's 4 in it, and then there's 5 that aren't, but somebody always gets up into that exacta trifecta mix, and sometimes
exactly.
Exactly.
Last year, I think it was West Coast Cowboy, if I'm not mistaken, was like the horse that got up into 3rd place at like a huge price. So
50 plus to 1 or something. It always happens. It's inevitable. It never comes a straight 3 chalk. Very rarely in these races, especially with the young kids coming up trying to qualify for the Derby. Let's move along to the Bob Baffert Bowl. At this point, guys, can we just pretend that California racing is still a real thing for a few minutes, even though we all know it isn't? No offense to anybody out there. It's a GD embarrassment. The guy's got 5 out of 8 horses.
Yeah. I mean, this is the probables field, so it hasn't drawn yet. It won't officially draw until Wednesday, so we'll see. But it's going to be a race dominated by Baffert. Yeah.
This is basically the all-star team of what might have been.
Yeah, minus Nisos, right? And minus the biggest all-star. Yeah.
And it's kind of the depressing scene here, but I guess this is the last year for it. What are you going to do, man? I mean, we've talked ad nauseum this thing. What are you going to do? But with that said, I know there's 5 big names right at the top here that at one point or another have been considered legit Derby contenders if the Baffert thing didn't go the way it went, which everybody's got an opinion. But with that said, who do we like here? And are any of the non-Baffert horses going to get up and get some Derby points here? Because it is grotesque what's going on.
I think, I mean, that's the thing is he's kind of scavenging, and taking all the Derby points from everybody else. You see a horse like Stronghold for Phil D'Amato, who went to the Sunland Derby to win that race to get points.
Yeah.
And, afterwards, D'Amato even said, I might go to Kentucky next. I might go to Louisiana. I might go to Florida. Like, I might go to Arkansas. Like, he knows that if he stays in California, he's not going to get any points. And he has a horse that he thinks is good enough to qualify for the Derby. And he's right, I think. But it's hard to go against any of the Bafferts if this group ends up running, particularly Muth and Wind Me Up. Those are the top 2. Wind Me Up looked, I guess, as good as you can look, finishing second to Nisos last time out, and is a legitimately decent horse. And Muth, I mean, we talked about that, Breeders' Cup Juvenile, in terms of locked coming out of that race. But, obviously Muth came out of that race and already ran and looked great winning the San Vicente. So, and then we saw Timberlake win, obviously the Rebel last weekend. Fierceness is the only one who's really flopped upon coming back, finishing third in the Holy Bull. And that was a troubled trip a little bit.
I'm not sure he's done yet. We'll see. I mean, I was never as high on Fierceness as some were, but
same. Yeah.
But he might bounce back. You never know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Muth and Wind Me Up are kind of the top 2. I'm not particularly high on Winstock and Coach Prime. So I do think a horse like Moonlit Sonata for Tim Yakteen absolutely has a chance to run up in the top 3 and, hit the board and get some points. But it's hard for me to get past the top 2 of Muth and Wind Me Up.
What a shame for that. This is a bad year for Baffert to not be able to have anybody in. And I see the point of the owners not moving him out of the barn this year to go to Yakteen like they have in the past or whoever. But it would have been a good year to do that. I would love to have seen Nisos. Nisos looks like it might be a freak.
I just saw he's opened, I should say. They're doing, I think for the first time ever I saw this, they're doing early wagering for the Preakness Stakes. And Nisos has opened up as the 4-1 favorite. Understandably so. I mean, if he won it last year on National Treasure, he's going to really win it this year on Nisos. Those 2 horses aren't in the same league. And we just saw.
And by the way, 4-1 is that the official? Is that an official futures line? The 4-1.
Yeah, it was.
Pretty good investment.
Betting is not closed yet, so we'll see. It could still fluctuate before that pool closes. But I know it opened at 4-1.
I guarantee, if everything goes down the way the horse stays healthy and everything like that, you're not going to get anywhere near 4-1 or even 1-1 on him. So might not be a little bad investment to put a couple bones on that thing. But yeah, dude, interesting. This is just like last year. We talked about it 1,000 times.
Yeah. With
the Baffert, the Yakteen, the whole thing. It changed everything. I mean, California racing is now pretty much off the radar. Like, I won't even bet that race. It's just not.
Yeah.
My interest is down, and it's unfortunate for California racing. Hopefully it all turns around next year, and you've got all the loudmouths on both sides that, I don't even want to get into all the controversial stuff. We all know the Baffert story. The unfortunate thing for me is the way they're handling the points. Because, I mean, these horses are eating all the California points, and so nobody else from California even has a shot. If these horses run top 3, which they probably will, in the San Felipe, then you're going to have a couple horses get 10 points out of here or whatever else. And
yeah, I think the big question is whether, so I guess to Bob's defense, he'd say, listen, there aren't many other races for me to run these 3-year-olds in to keep them active, for me to have them
yeah,
campaign for the
dude, no,
rest of the
I don't
3-year-old
blame him at
year.
all.
Yeah. And so, because I know what'll happen next, which is suddenly you go to the Santa Anita Derby, which is the really big points spectacle, and he's going to have them all running there too.
Yeah, for sure.
And
why not?
I don't blame him, because that's the next logical prep for them to have for the Preakness, basically. So, it's just, that's just
Not to
kind of the
mention
way it is.
the money. I mean,
Yeah.
They don't get the points. They can't run the Kentucky Derby, but it's just kind of it's kind of silly that it's. I mean, granted, the whole country runs like this, but state to state with different rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts, but
too big of a fish
it's
for us to fry tonight. But
yeah, but I will say one thing I will very quickly mention is I do think we'll have a little bit of a better picture of the Derby after this week. That I think we'll see kind of what comes out of New York. We'll see particularly the Fountain of Youth and kind of how that race plays out. We'll even have the Battaglia at Turfway Park this weekend as well, as another prep race. And so, you could see another kind of Rich Strike or Two Fills type of a horse that kind of comes out of that circuit. I know Two Fills just ran in the Jeff Ruby, but still you could have kind of a horse come out of that circuit again for the second year in a row. So I think
that's a couple that came off of that circuit that ran awesome. That's two heroes. So
yeah, absolutely.
Rich Strike and Two Fills was the darling last year. I know for you, but for a lot of people, he ran great.
Yeah, no, he did. He ran huge, but yeah. So it should be a lot of fun. We should get a little bit more clarity, and particularly that Fountain of Youth field could give us a lot of insight into who are your top 2 or 3 contenders leading into the final round of preps.
Speaking of that, to close out this conversation, who are your top couple of contenders to this point? I mean, obviously, this could all change after this weekend, but who's most impressive couple of horses you've seen besides
it's hard not to go with recency bias and say Timberlake and Sierra Leone. I mean, because they kind of they answered the bell in a way that you would expect horses to answer the bell, and they came up, they won their 50-point preps, they did it in a in Sierra Leone's case, kind of did it in a pretty amazing fashion, and even you heard Tyler Gaffleone say afterwards, the horse didn't get into its best stride until after the finish line, and still won that race. And so, now is he a little bit of a pace-dependent horse that's going to have to deal with a lot of traffic issues in the Kentucky Derby?
That's the scary part about his running style. Yep,
that's totally legitimate. But Timberlake certainly has that more effective running style traditionally for the Kentucky Derby. That kind of tracking trip of doesn't need the lead and can sit off the pace a little
more
bit.
Versatile, right?
Much more. And
he was drunk driving down the lane.
Well, yeah,
he did not run his best race by any means either.
No, and he still
started staggering. He started staggering around the 8th pole, and I was getting a little nervous because I had everything on him. And he started staggering, and I was like, "Wow, he is." He was stumbling out wide, and he looked tired or whatever. I don't know whether it was just that or just the greenness, but that just shows you he's got a lot of improvement to make too, or a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah, I think, if you're looking for horses that might improve underneath, I think a horse like Catching Freedom, I think a horse like Liberal Arts, I think a horse like Honor Marie, I think all those horses could come back a lot better next time they race, because they all caught sloppy sealed tracks. They all made big moves from the back. And they could all, I think, stand to take a step forward if they catch a dry, fast track next time out. So those 3 are kind of a little bit more under the radar, but I really like those 3 horses quite a bit.
Matthew DeSantis joining us for these big 3 this weekend, 4 if you want to count the Battaglia. Matt, anything you need to promote or talk about before we let you go?
Well, just to, encourage people to obviously check out all the content that we have on Naira Bets. We have some great promotions for Derby bankroll builders. We have, hit and splits for late pick 5s. We have all sorts of great promos for people who decide to play with Naira Bets and opt in. But we also just have great content up there as well. So whether it's kind of full field analysis, whether it is top picks, long shots of the day, I have stuff coming up all the time. And I know I've teased this many times on your channel before, but it is finally going to come to fruition. We are going to be launching a Naira Bets YouTube here in the weeks leading up to the Kentucky Derby. So be on the lookout for that. And if you follow me on the Twitter at the handle Failed to Menace, you'll be able to get all of it.
Thank you, Matthew. Really appreciate your time. Good luck, everybody, this weekend on the 3 Derby preps, and peace on earth.